She was 7 months pregnant, but still carried heavy boxes in the market warehouse. The boss said that pregnancy is not an illness. Nobody did anything until Steph Curry walked into the store. What he did changed everything. The sound of the alarm echoed through the small apartment at 4:30 in the morning. Michelle Thompson stretched her arm to turn it off, feeling a familiar twinge in her back as she moved. At 34 years old, 7 months pregnant, she should have been used to this constant discomfort, but her body was sore after another week of hard work at SuperValue Market, making every movement a challenge. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Michelle ran her hand over her prominent belly. "Good morning, little one," she whispered, feeling a gentle kick in response. This brief moment of connection was her morning ritual, a reminder of why she continued to fight. The silent apartment amplified the absence of Mark, her husband, who had died 8 months ago in a construction accident. The pain of loss was still fresh, but Michelle didn't have the luxury of giving in to grief. Not with a baby on the way and bills piling up. In the bathroom, while preparing for the day, Michelle avoided looking directly at the letter from the medical insurer fixed to the mirror. The message was engraved in her memory. Her health plan, linked to her employment at SuperValue, would cover childbirth and postnatal care only if she remained an active employee. With savings practically non-existent after Mark's funeral expenses, losing this job would mean financial disaster. "Just a few more months," she murmured to herself, adjusting the green SuperValue uniform that barely stretched over her belly. "We can endure." The 5:15 bus was almost empty when Michelle boarded. The 40-minute journey to the other side of Oakland was her only moment of true rest during the day. Through the foggy window, the first rays of sunlight were beginning to color the horizon of San Francisco Bay. There was a time when she and Mark dreamed of a house in the suburbs, perhaps with a small garden. Now, keeping a roof over her head already seemed like a daily achievement. SuperValue Market was one of the largest stores in the chain in the region, located in a busy shopping center. When Michelle got off the bus, she could already see the silhouette of manager Frank Dawson through the store windows, gesturing energetically to the morning shift employees. She took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself. "Thompson, you're 2 minutes late," was Frank's greeting as soon as Michelle crossed the back door. His tone was as rough as sandpaper. "Sorry, Mr. Dawson, the bus—" "Spare me the excuses," he interrupted, consulting his clipboard. "Today, you're in the warehouse. A shipment of drinks has arrived that needs to be organized before opening." Michelle felt a tightness in her stomach. Warehouse work was the most physically demanding, involving lifting heavy boxes and long periods standing on concrete floors. Normally, she would be assigned to the cash register or to restocking light products, but in recent weeks, Frank seemed determined to test her. "Mr. Dawson," Michelle tried, keeping her voice calm, "my doctor recommended that I avoid lifting more than 15 pounds at this stage of pregnancy. Maybe I could—" "Pregnancy is not an illness, Thompson." Frank cut her off, his words as sharp as razors. "I have 3 children, and my wife worked until the day of delivery with all of them. If you can't do your job, there's a line of people who can." The veiled threat hung in the air. Michelle nodded silently, heading to the warehouse at the back of the store. On the way, she crossed paths with Jamal, a restocking colleague who gave her a sympathetic look. "He's being tough on you again," Jamal commented quietly, making sure Frank wasn't nearby. "This isn't right, Michelle." "I'm fine," she replied automatically, the phrase that had become her mantra in recent months. "I need this job." The warehouse was a cavernous space, poorly lit and cold on California autumn mornings. Pallets full of merchandise awaited organization, and Michelle began methodically, separating the lighter boxes to process first. With luck, when she got to the drinks, some other employee would be available to help. Luck wasn't on her side that morning. 2 hours later, she was alone, facing stacks of soft drink and mineral water crates, each weighing well over the limit recommended by her obstetrician. Drops of sweat formed on her forehead as she calculated how to complete the task without harming herself or the baby. "Need a hand?" The voice of Sophia, one of the store's oldest cashiers, brought a moment of relief. The middle-aged woman was peering through the warehouse door. "Frank would send me home if he caught me here," Sophia continued, entering anyway. "But I have 10 minutes before my shift officially starts. Let's sort this out." With Sophia's discreet help, Michelle managed to organize the heavier boxes. This was how SuperValue employees survived under Frank's management, helping each other in moments when he was distracted. "You can't go on like this," Sophia said, watching how Michelle massaged her lower back. "Have you thought about talking to HR or the regional manager?" Michelle shook her head. "I've seen what happens to those who complain. Remember Maria? They cut her hours until she quit. I can't risk it." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of physical tasks. Every hour, Michelle felt the weight of exhaustion accumulating, the pain in her back intensifying. During her 15-minute lunch break, Frank was strict about the time. She could barely swallow half of her sandwich before being called back. "Spill in aisle 3, Frank informed her dryly, handing her a mop. "And when you're done, I need you to restock the diapers. The pallet is in the warehouse." The diapers? Bulky and awkward packages piled on a pallet in the furthest corner of the warehouse. Michelle felt a wave of despair, but nodded obediently. While cleaning the spill, she discreetly observed the customers passing by. Families, elderly people, young professionals on lunch breaks. None of them noticed her silent struggle. The baby who was stirring in protest inside her. The hours standing that made her ankles swell to the point of almost bursting her shoes. By late afternoon, Michelle was restocking the diapers, carrying the heavy packages one by one. The clock marked almost the end of her shift when she felt a sudden dizziness. The store seemed to spin around her, the fluorescent lights becoming blinding. She leaned on a shelf, breathing deeply, trying to ward off the vertigo. "Thompson!" Frank's voice echoed down the aisle. "When you're done there, I need you back in the warehouse. Another shipment has arrived." Michelle opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come out. The dizziness intensified, and for a terrifying moment, she thought she might faint right there, in the middle of the store. "Are you listening to me, Thompson?" Frank approached, his face a mask of irritation. "Yes, sir," she finally managed to respond, straightening with effort. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." As Frank walked away, Michelle felt the baby give a strong kick, as if protesting against the conditions imposed on his mother. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her last reserves of strength. "Just a few more hours," she whispered to her unborn son. "Tomorrow will be better." But as she headed to the warehouse, carrying the weight of her uncertain future, Michelle knew that tomorrow would be exactly the same. Unless something changed dramatically, this was her reality. A daily struggle for survival, invisible to the eyes of the world around her. At least, until that moment, invisible. The afternoon was advancing into early evening when the black Mercedes-Benz SUV parked discreetly in one of the most distant spaces at SuperValue Market. Steph Curry hadn't planned this stop. After an intense preparatory training session for the game against the Sacramento Kings, He should have been heading to the hotel to rest, but his dry throat and the need for some healthy snacks for the night made him detour from his path. "I'll be back in 10 minutes, Rico," Curry said to his driver and personal security guard. "Just going to grab water and some snacks." Rico nodded, accustomed to the NBA superstar's simple habits, despite his celebrity status. Wearing a plain gray t-shirt, jeans, and a discreet cap pulled down, Curry hoped to go unnoticed, something he managed with surprising frequency when not wearing the Warriors' colors. The refrigerated air of SuperValue greeted him when the automatic doors opened. Curry picked up a small basket, heading first to the beverage section. His eyes scanned the shelves looking for alkaline water, his preference before games. It was then that he noticed something unusual. Several shelves were partially empty, with products disorganized or missing, different from the impeccable presentation typical of supermarkets. A young employee was hurriedly passing by with a box of products. "Excuse me," Curry called politely. "Do you have Flow or Essentia water?" "Ah, they should be coming," replied the young man, clearly stressed. "We've had problems with the stock today. If you want to check in aisle 5, there might be some bottles there." Curry thanked him and followed the indicated direction, noticing a tension in the environment that wasn't common in commercial establishments. Employees moved hurriedly, casting furtive glances at a middle-aged man with a manager badge, who was speaking harshly to a cashier. In aisle 5, there wasn't the water he was looking for, but something caught his attention. A pregnant employee, visibly in an advanced stage of pregnancy, was trying to maneuver a heavy cart loaded with boxes of canned products. Curry observed, initially just curious, as she struggled to control the weight of the cart on a small slope in the floor. The years of physical training and improved reflexes made him take an instinctive step forward when the cart momentarily seemed to escape her control. But the woman managed to stabilize it, breathing deeply with an expression of relief mixed with exhaustion. Curry kept observing for a few moments, something in the scene awakening his attention. The employee, her badge identified her as Michelle, moved with the deliberate care of someone in pain, a hand occasionally supporting her lower back while she continued to work. "Thompson!" The authoritative voice cut through the relatively tranquil environment of the aisle. Curry saw the man he had identified as the manager approaching with firm steps. Discreetly, the player turned to a nearby shelf, pretending to examine protein bars while listening to the interaction. "Mr. Dawson." Michelle's voice was calm, but Curry noticed the slight tremor of apprehension. "Why isn't all of this on the shelves yet? The inventory is tonight, and I need everything organized." The manager's tone was impatient, bordering on hostility. "I'm moving as fast as I can," replied Michelle, her voice maintaining an impressive dignity in the face of evident pressure. "Some cans fell, and I had to reorganize." "We don't have time for excuses," interrupted the manager, looking at his watch. "We've already talked about this. If you can't keep up the pace." Curry watched Michelle straighten her shoulders, a hand unconsciously protective over her belly. "I'll finish on time, sir." The manager, Dawson, from what Curry had heard, let out an exasperated sigh. "Look, Thompson, I know you're pregnant, but pregnancy is not an illness. Stop using that as an excuse. I have an entire store to manage and deadlines to meet." The comment made Curry frown, his attention now fully turned to the scene. He observed as Michelle silently nodded and returned to work, now trying to lift a heavy box from the cart to the highest shelf. The expression of discomfort on her face was evident, even as she tried to disguise it. What disturbed Curry most was the normality with which everything happened, as if it were perfectly acceptable to demand that a woman in an advanced stage of pregnancy perform tasks clearly inappropriate for her condition. He vividly remembered when Isha, his wife, was pregnant with their daughters. How he monitored her every movement. How everyone around them worried about her comfort and well-being. The distance between that reality and what he was witnessing now was shocking. Dawson walked away, firing orders to other employees as he went down the aisle. Michelle, now alone again, allowed herself a brief moment of vulnerability. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and gently massaged the side of her belly before returning to the task. Curry left his shopping basket on the nearest shelf, completely forgetting the original purpose of his visit. Something more important demanded his attention now. He calmly approached Michelle, who was concentrated trying to reach a high shelf. "Let me help you with that," he offered softly, not wanting to startle her. Michelle turned, clearly surprised by the offer. Her tired eyes met Curry's, but there wasn't the flash of recognition that usually accompanied such encounters. To her, he was just another kind customer. "Oh, you? Don't need to bother, sir. I can manage." "It's no bother at all," insisted Curry, already picking up the heavy box she was trying to lift. "These seem quite heavy for anyone, actually." Michelle hesitated, clearly torn between accepting help and fear of repercussions. "Thank you, but we don't want to bother customers. My manager wouldn't be happy." "I'm not bothered," replied Curry with a genuine smile, already positioning the box on the high shelf. "And as for your manager, well, sometimes people need to reconsider their priorities." As he spoke, Curry noticed that some customers and employees were beginning to look in his direction, expressions of recognition appearing on their faces. Whispers began to circulate through the aisles. "Is that Curry? Looks like Steph Curry. The Warriors player?" Michelle, however, focused on her work and worried about the manager's presence, remained unaware of her impromptu helper's identity. To her, he was just a kind customer, offering a hand on a particularly difficult day. It was at this moment that Curry decided he would not leave that store without ensuring the situation changed. Observing Michelle's effort, the manager's indifference, and the atmosphere of generalized tension, he felt a responsibility that transcended his fame or position. Sometimes, being in the right place at the right time meant more than making a decisive shot in the last second of a game. Some struggles occurred away from the spotlight, and this was one of them. Until now. "Allow me to help you with the rest of this?" Curry asked, already beginning to transfer more boxes from the cart to the shelves. The ease with which he lifted the heavy products contrasted dramatically with the visible effort that Michelle made to perform the same task. Michelle hesitated, divided between relief for the unexpected help and fear of the consequences. "It's very kind, but I really shouldn't. If the manager comes back—" "Don't worry about that," replied Curry, with a tranquility that only comes from confidence. "Sometimes we all need a helping hand. How far along are you in your pregnancy?" 7 months, she replied automatically, still trying to organize some cans that had come loose. "About 8 weeks to go?" Curry nodded, continuing to help while conversing. "My wife went through 3 pregnancies. In the 7th month, she could barely tie her shoes, let alone lift heavy things like these." Something in the casual mention of his wife made Michelle look more attentively at the helpful stranger. There was something familiar about his face, in the way he moved. Before she could make the connection, a sharp voice interrupted the moment. "What's going on here?" Frank Dawson returned to the aisle, his gaze quickly alternating between Michelle and the man helping her. His initial expression of irritation soon transformed into a forced smile when he realized a customer was involved, the kind of facial transition that retail managers master. "Sir, "We appreciate your kindness, but we have protocols to follow," said Frank, now adopting his cordial management tone. "Michelle can perfectly take care of the stock. It's her job, after all." Curry finished putting a box of canned goods on the shelf before turning completely to Frank, straightening to his full athletic height. Without the cap he now held in his hands, his face was completely visible under the fluorescent lights of the store. "Actually, I'm concerned if this is really the appropriate job for her at this moment," replied Curry, his tone polite but firm. "From what I understand, she's in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy. I'm curious about your store's policies regarding the adaptation of duties for pregnant employees." Frank blinked rapidly, adjusting his tie while processing the situation. His brain registered something familiar in the man's face, but he had not yet made the complete connection. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but I assure you that SuperValue follows all labor regulations. If Michelle had any medical restriction, we would certainly accommodate her." His tone was diplomatic, but his look to Michelle carried a silent warning. "Interesting," continued Curry, maintaining calm, "because I just heard you tell her that pregnancy is not an illness, and from what I can see, she is clearly uncomfortable carrying this weight." Frank's face slightly reddened. "With all due respect, sir, this is an internal store matter. If you will allow me, I'm sure Michelle can continue her work now. If you need help finding something—" "You know," Curry interrupted, the smile never leaving his face, but his eyes becoming more intense, "my wife is very involved with maternal health. When she was pregnant, her doctor expressly recommended not lifting more than 15 pounds. These boxes seem well heavier than that." At this moment, a small group of customers and employees began to form at the ends of the aisle. Whispers and phones pointed in their direction indicated that the NBA star's presence was no longer going unnoticed. "It's Steph Curry!" finally exclaimed a teenager who was discreetly filming with her cell phone. Frank's face immediately transformed when the realization hit him like a bucket of cold water. His eyes widened and his posture completely changed. "Mr. Curry," he said, his voice now notably higher-pitched, "it's an honor to have you in our store. If we had known you were coming, we would have prepared—" "I didn't come for an official visit," Curry cut in gently but firmly. "I came to buy water, and ended up witnessing something that deeply concerned me." Michelle looked between the two men, understanding finally dawning on her exhausted face. The kind customer was Steph Curry, the 3-time NBA champion, the revolutionary shooter of the Golden State Warriors, one of the biggest celebrities in American sports. Her face intensely flushed, part embarrassment, part shock. "Mr. Dawson," continued Curry, his tone now more direct, "I have 3 children. I saw my wife go through 3 pregnancies. I know exactly how challenging this period is, even without having to carry heavy boxes or stand for hours on concrete floors." Frank began to visibly sweat. "Mr. Curry, I assure you that we value all our employees. If there were any problem, the problem is happening right now, in front of me," replied Curry, "and I suspect it's not the first time." The crowd of onlookers grew, with customers stopping with their shopping carts and employees finding sudden reasons to be in that specific aisle. Some were discreetly filming with their phones, others watched with undisguised interest at the confrontation. Curry turned to Michelle, his tone softening significantly. "How long have you been working here?" 6 years, she responded, her voice almost a whisper. "And since you became pregnant, have you requested any accommodation in your work?" Michelle hesitated, briefly glancing at Frank before answering. "Yes, several times. I even brought a letter from my doctor recommending lighter tasks." Frank quickly intervened. "There must be some misunderstanding. I don't remember receiving any medical documentation. If I had seen any official recommendation, I personally delivered it 2 months ago, interrupted Michelle, a spark of courage appearing in her voice. And again last week, when the back pain got worse. The silence that followed was laden with tension. Frank looked like a man frantically trying to calculate his options, aware of the gazes and cameras around. "Look," said Curry, his voice lower, but perfectly audible to those nearby. "I'm not here to create problems. I'm here because I believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, especially someone in a vulnerable situation like pregnancy." He turned to face Frank directly. "When Isha was pregnant, our entire family, friends, teammates, everyone came together to support her, not because she wasn't capable, but because it was the right thing to do. Because when we take care of each other, we all become stronger." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Frank seemed to physically shrink under public scrutiny. "Mr. Curry," Frank tried again, now in an almost pleading tone, "perhaps we could discuss this in the office? I'm sure we can resolve any misunderstanding." "I don't think it's a misunderstanding," Curry responded calmly. "I think it's a matter of priorities, and perhaps an opportunity to do better from now on." At this moment, another older employee approached hurriedly. His badge identified him as Carlos, assistant manager. "Mr. Dawson, the regional manager is on line 1. It seems someone posted a video on social media, and he wants to speak urgently." Frank's face paled. The situation was quickly escaping his control. "I suggest you take that call," said Curry, "and perhaps consider that some changes need to happen here, immediately." As Frank hurried away toward the office, Curry turned his attention completely to Michelle, who seemed simultaneously relieved and terrified. "Everything will be all right," he assured her, his voice low and gentle. "You're not alone in this situation. But I would like to understand better what has been happening here, if you're willing to talk." Michelle looked around, at the curious faces observing them, at the aisle where she had worked exhaustively for years, and finally at her unborn baby. 6 years of loyal service, months of silent discomfort and ignored pain. Perhaps it was time for someone to hear her story. "Yes," she finally said, a small but significant spark of hope lighting up in her tired eyes. "I think so." The small employee break room at the back of SuperValue Market wasn't exactly a welcoming place. Worn plastic tables, uncomfortable chairs, and fluorescent lighting created a utilitarian environment, designed more for quick meals than for meaningful conversations. Now, however, it served as a temporary sanctuary away from the curious gazes that had formed in the store's aisles. "Are you sure you won't get in trouble for being here?" Michelle asked nervously, carefully sitting down in one of the chairs, visibly relieved to take the weight off her swollen feet. "Mr. Dawson doesn't usually like when we spend too much time in the break room." Curry offered a reassuring smile as he sat across the table. "I think Mr. Dawson is a bit too busy at the moment to worry about that." He paused, his tone becoming gentler. "How are you feeling? Really?" The question, simple, direct, but filled with genuine concern, caught Michelle off guard. For weeks, months actually, no one had really asked how she was, certainly not with the expectation of an honest answer. She began, the automatic words, "I'm fine," dying on her lips. Instead, her shoulders slumped slightly, as if an invisible weight finally became perceptible, even to her. "I'm exhausted, constantly, and afraid." Curry nodded, giving her space to continue. "I have back pains that sometimes wake me up at night. My feet swell so much that I can barely put on shoes at the end of the day." She paused, instinctively placing her hand over her belly. "And I'm worried that all this strain is affecting the baby. But I can't simply stop working." "Because of the health insurance?" asked Curry, remembering the fragmented information he had caught during the confrontation in the aisle. Michelle nodded. "Mostly. Without it, I wouldn't be able to pay for prenatal care or for delivery. And afterward," her voice faltered slightly, "well, babies are expensive, and I'm alone in this. If you don't mind me asking, the child's father?" "Mark," she said, and something in her voice when pronouncing the name made Curry immediately realize that there was a bigger story there. "Mark was my husband. He worked in construction. 8 months ago, there was an EV accident at the construction site. A scaffold collapsed and—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Her eyes welled up, but Michelle took a deep breath, maintaining her composure with impressive willpower. "I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after the funeral. We weren't trying, but—" A small smile touched her lips for the first time. "It seems the universe had other plans." Curry felt a lump in his throat. "So this baby is all I have left of him, of our family." Michelle discreetly wiped away a tear that escaped. "My parents live on the other side of the country, in Maine. We don't have the financial means for them to come or for me to go back. Mark's family was small, just a sister who lives abroad." The complete picture was beginning to form, and it was devastatingly clear why Michelle endured working conditions that many would have contested or abandoned. "When I started having difficulties with the heavier tasks, I tried to talk to Frank, Mr. Dawson. First, informally, suggesting that I could cover more hours at the register or organizing lighter products. He said he needed flexible people and that he couldn't provide special treatment. And after that, I brought a letter from my obstetrician, explicitly recommending weight limitation and regular rest periods off my feet." Michelle shook her head, recalling the frustration. "Frank took the letter, said he would forward it to HR, and never mentioned it again. When I asked 2 weeks later, he said it was being processed." "Did you try to speak directly with HR or someone above him?" "HR is centralized, not in this store. I sent emails, but only received automated responses. And as for contacting superiors—" She hesitated. "Frank made it very clear that formal complaints would be considered attitude problems. I saw what happened to other employees who tried that route." Curry considered the information, connecting the dots. "So you were stuck, desperately needing the job and insurance, with no close family support, and facing a manager who actively ignored your medical needs." "You summed it up well," Michelle agreed, with a sad smile. "Each day has been a struggle to simply make it to the end of the shift. The pain, the exhaustion, the constant worry. But what else could I do?" At this moment, the break room door opened, and Sophia, the older cashier that Curry had briefly observed earlier, peeked in. Her eyes widened at seeing the famous player, but she quickly regained her composure. "Michelle, dear, I just wanted to see if you were okay. Everyone is talking about what happened." She entered the room, revealing that she wasn't alone. Behind her, 3 other employees appeared: Jamal, a young stocker, Elena from the bakery, and Carlos, the assistant manager who had previously informed Frank about the regional manager's call. "We've been trying to help her when we can," Sophia explained to Curry. "We cover some of the heavier tasks when Frank isn't, switch sections with her." "But it's risky," Jamal added. "Frank has eyes everywhere, and whoever gets caught wasting time helping colleagues ends up with hours cut in the next schedule." Carlos, the assistant manager, looked especially uncomfortable. I tried to suggest some changes to the schedule, more appropriate assignments for her condition, but Frank is the boss, Michelle concluded, and he makes that very clear to everyone. Curry observed the small group, recognizing the familiar dynamics of a toxic work environment, supportive but powerless employees caught between the desire to help each other and the fear of retaliation from management. "Michelle isn't the only one," said Elena, the bakery employee, breaking a brief silence. "Frank has this behavior with anyone he considers problematic. People with medical needs, single parents who occasionally need to be absent for emergencies with their children, students with exam schedules. He simply doesn't tolerate what he calls complications." "It's as if he thinks we're machines," added Jamal, "that we don't have lives or needs outside this place." Carlos nervously checked his watch. "We need to get back. Frank is in the office with the regional manager on the phone, but it won't take long." As the employees prepared to leave, Curry noticed how they all looked at Michelle with genuine concern, a stark contrast to her manager's indifference. "Thank you," Michelle said softly to her colleagues. The simple gratitude carried the weight of months of small acts of kindness that had made her situation a little less unbearable. When they were alone again, Curry leaned slightly forward, his expression determined but gentle. "Michelle, there's one more thing I'd like to know. What do you hope will happen now? What would be a real solution to your situation?" The question caught her by surprise. For so long, Michelle had operated in survival mode, focused only on enduring one more day, one more shift, one more week. The idea of a real solution, of true change, seemed almost a luxury she didn't allow herself to dream of. "I just want," she began hesitantly, allowing herself to articulate long-suppressed desires. "I want to be able to work in conditions that don't harm my baby. I want to not have to choose between my health and my livelihood. I want to feel that my 6 years of work at this company means something, that I'm not just a disposable piece." Her words, simple but profound, hung in the air between them. It wasn't an extravagant request, just basic dignity and human consideration. "And after the baby is born?" Michelle took a deep breath. Adequate maternity leave would be a dream. Time to recover from childbirth, to establish breastfeeding, to bond with my child. And then, maybe a schedule that allows me to be both a mother and an employee, without having to completely sacrifice one role for the other. Curry nodded, his eyes reflecting a quiet resolve. "You know, Michelle, sometimes we need a reminder that we're not alone, even when it seems we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders." He took his phone from his pocket, briefly looking at the screen. "I think it's time to ensure that your voice is really heard." The conversation between Curry and Michelle was interrupted by Frank Dawson's hurried entrance, his face now laden with tension. He entered the break room with the expression of someone who just received alarming news, and the atmosphere immediately changed. The other employees, who had gathered to hear what was happening, fell silent, realizing that the situation was about to intensify. "Mr. Curry," Frank began, his voice tense, "I don't know what you're doing here, but we need to talk." Curry wasn't intimidated. "We do, indeed. And I would say, you need to listen more than talk." Frank cast a nervous glance at Michelle, as if weighing his options. "I think we have a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Curry interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "How do you explain the fact that an employee in an advanced stage of pregnancy is being forced to perform tasks that are clearly not safe for her or her baby? This is not a misunderstanding. It's a matter of human dignity." Frank seemed to lose his composure. "I am the manager of this store, and you are the manager of this store, and had the responsibility to care for the health and safety of your employees," said Curry, his gaze penetrating. "But from what I'm hearing, you haven't been doing that." Michelle felt her heart racing. The tension in the room was palpable, and she was aware that the situation was rapidly changing. All eyes were on Frank, who was now clearly on the defensive. "Look, what I want to say is that we have rules and procedures to follow," he tried to argue, but his voice was beginning to falter. "If someone isn't happy here, they can leave." Curry crossed his arms, his expression unwavering. "And who does that really benefit, Frank? You? Your store? Or Michelle and everyone else who is counting on you to be treated with respect?" The tension increased even more when a group of customers began to gather outside the break room. People started to whisper, and some began filming the scene with their phones. Curry's presence, the NBA star, was attracting attention, and the situation was becoming more complicated by the second. "You can't simply ignore the needs of your employees," Curry continued. "This isn't just a matter of company policy, it's a matter of ethics, and this needs to change now." Frank hesitated, looking at the door and then back at Curry. "I need you to leave, Mr. Curry. I can't have you interfering in my business." "I'm not interfering, I'm intervening," said Curry with a tone of determination. "And I'm not leaving until we have a solution." At that moment, Carlos, the assistant manager, decided to intervene. "Frank, maybe we should listen to what Mr. Curry has to say. The situation is becoming complicated." "Complicated?" Frank shot a look of contempt at Carlos. "We're just following procedures here. It's not as if we're doing something illegal." "Actually, you might be breaking the law," Curry responded, his voice now more serious. "If you're not offering reasonable accommodations for a pregnant employee, that's a violation of her rights. And, believe me, this is not something that I or any other NBA athlete will take lightly." The silence that followed was profound. Michelle observed the internal struggle that Frank was facing. He was clearly aware that the situation was becoming public, and the consequences could be severe. The environment was changing, and the pressure was, finally, beginning to accumulate. I will check on this situation," said Frank, his voice hesitant. "I will consult with HR about this." "That's the least you can do," Curry responded, his voice now softer but still firm. "And, in the meantime, you should allow Michelle to have a day off. She needs time to take care of herself and the baby." "I can't just," Frank began, but Curry interrupted him. "Yes, you can, and you should. If you don't, you'll have to deal with a wave of adverse reactions, not just from your employees, but also from the media and the public. Think about how this might affect your store and your reputation." With that, Curry turned to Michelle, his gaze warm and encouraging. "You are not alone, Michelle. I'm here to ensure that your voice is heard." She felt a wave of gratitude and relief course through her body. She had never imagined that a famous athlete would care so much about her situation. His support seemed like a ray of hope amid the darkness she had faced in recent months. Frank, realizing he was losing control of the situation, finally nodded, albeit reluctantly. "All right, you can have a day off. But I don't want this to become a bigger problem than it already is." "It won't be a problem, Frank," said Curry, giving him a firm look. "The only thing you need to worry about now is the well-being of your employee and the reputation of your store." Of course," Frank muttered, his voice now trembling. He turned, quickly leaving the break room, clearly anxious to escape the pressure and attention. With Frank out of the scene, the tension slowly began to dissipate. Michelle felt an immense weight being lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you, Steph," she said, her voice low. "This means more than you can imagine." "You're welcome," Curry responded, smiling. "Nobody should go through this, especially someone who is about to become a mother." Carlos, who was still present, looked at Curry with respect. "I think we all need to learn to be more supportive. What you did today was admirable. I hope that all of you also feel that you have the right to demand fair conditions," said Curry. "No one should feel unsafe in a work environment, especially when they're dealing with issues as personal as pregnancy." Sophia, who had heard everything, stepped forward. "I think we need to unite and ensure that this doesn't happen again. If you can help us take this issue forward, it will be a big step." Curry nodded, his gaze firm. "I'll do what I can. We can work together to create an environment where everyone feels safe and respected." "That would be amazing," said Jamal, excited. "If we have someone like you on our side, we can cause real change." The conversation began to flow, and the atmosphere in the break room began to change. Michelle's concerns were still present, but now, for the first time in a long time, there was a glimpse of hope. Curry was willing to help, and this created a new possibility for change. As they talked and exchanged ideas, Curry began to make notes on his phone, thinking of ways to mobilize not just the Super Value team, but other athletes and celebrities who could join the cause. He knew he needed to act quickly to ensure that Michelle's situation and that of other employees wasn't just a footnote, but a central issue in the discussion about workplace rights. "Let's make this happen," said Curry, his tone full of determination. "Together, we can make a real difference." Michelle felt a wave of hope. Finally, she wasn't alone. She had allies by her side and an opportunity to fight for a fairer and more humane work environment. And at that moment, she began to believe that she could build a better future for herself and her baby. The next morning, Michelle woke up to the persistent sound of the telephone. The sun hadn't even fully risen yet, and she needed a moment to remember that, for the first time in months, she wouldn't have to go to work. The unexpected day off seemed almost surreal. But what really surprised her was the number of notifications appearing on her screen. Messages, missed calls, emails. Her name was being mentioned in message groups, and a flood of social media notifications made her phone slower. Confused, she opened the first video sent by a coworker. It was a recording from the previous day, at the exact moment when Steph Curry confronted Frank Dawson in the store. The caption on the video said, "Steph Curry defends pregnant employee against abusive manager." Hero! Michelle was astonished to realize that the video already had millions of views. The comments were a mixture of outrage at Frank's behavior and admiration for Curry's stance. "This is unacceptable," said one. Comment: "Every pregnant woman deserves to be treated with respect." Another said, "Steph Curry is more than an athlete. He is a true leader." And among messages of support, there were also people sharing similar stories of mistreatment at work. As Michelle processed all this, her colleague Sophia called. "Are you seeing this, Michelle? You're going viral." "I don't know what to say," replied Michelle, still dazed. "This is surreal." "Surreal nothing. This video is on all social networks and even on news sites. You've become a symbol of something bigger, Michelle. People are sharing their stories because of you." Michelle felt a mixture of emotions. On one hand, it was comforting to know her situation was being recognized, but on the other, she feared the repercussions. "And Frank? What's happening at the store?" Sophia hesitated before answering. He's in trouble, that's for sure. The regional manager showed up early today, and I heard that company headquarters is involved now. But you don't need to worry about him now. Just enjoy this moment. You deserve it. As Sophia spoke, another notification appeared on Michelle's phone. It was a message from Steph Curry. He had left his number with Michelle the day before, in case she needed anything. "Good morning, Michelle," the message said. "I wanted you to know that yesterday's video is having a huge impact. This is an opportunity to open a broader conversation about labor rights and conditions for pregnant women. If you're comfortable, I'd like to talk with you about next steps." Michelle read the message several times before responding. She didn't know exactly what she could contribute, but the idea of transforming her experience into something positive for other people gave her courage. "Of course," she replied. "I'm willing to help in any way possible." Meanwhile, on the other side of Oakland, Steph Curry was at his home, surrounded by his team of advisors and representatives from his foundation. The living room was full of laptops, tablets, and whiteboards with strategic notes. The viral video had triggered a wave of reactions that no one had anticipated, and Curry knew he needed to act quickly. "We're dealing with something much bigger than just a store," said Curry, as he looked at the screen of his iPad, which displayed hundreds of supportive messages and stories shared by workers from across the country. "This is about how companies treat their female employees, especially those who are in vulnerable situations." "Do you want to make an official statement?" asked one of his advisors. "Yes, but I want it to be more than words," replied Curry. "I want actions, something that really makes a difference." The team discussed various ideas, from awareness campaigns to partnerships with labor rights organizations. But what most excited Curry was the idea of creating a specific fund to support working women in vulnerable situations, starting with Michelle. "We'll call it the Curry Family Fund for Working Mothers," he said, writing the name on a whiteboard. "I want this fund to help women like Michelle have access to resources that companies often deny: adequate maternity leave, health care, and, above all, dignity." Notifications on social media continued to arrive. Athletes, celebrities, and advocates for workers' rights were speaking out and supporting the cause. LeBron James tweeted, "Great respect to my brother Steph Curry for taking a stand. We need more leaders like this." And the First Lady of the United States, known for her work with working families, also commented, "Every woman deserves to be treated with respect at work. Thank you, Steph Curry, for using your voice to defend this." Later that day, Michelle received another call, this time from a producer of one of the biggest talk shows on American TV. "Michelle, your story is moving the country. We would like to invite you to share your experience on our show. Steph Curry will also participate. What do you think?" Michelle almost dropped the phone. The idea of appearing on TV was intimidating, but at the same time, she felt it could be a golden opportunity to make her voice heard. Yes, of course, I accept," she replied, trying to hide her nervousness. Meanwhile, the situation at SuperValue Market continued to unfold. Frank Dawson was suspended while the company conducted an internal investigation. Headquarters issued a public statement apologizing to Michelle and promising to review their labor policies to ensure such situations wouldn't happen again. Although it was a small step in the right direction, Curry knew there was still much to be done. He met with Michelle and other local activists to plan the next steps. Together, they decided to use the moment to push for broader changes, not just at SuperValue, but at companies across the country. "We're just beginning," said Curry during a meeting, "and we'll make sure these women's voices are heard." At the end of the day, Michelle sat in her living room holding a recent ultrasound of her baby. For the first time in a long time, she felt something that seemed like hope. Not just for herself, but for so many other women facing similar struggles. She looked at the phone screen and saw a message from Curry. "Remember, you're not alone in this. We're together, and we're going to make a difference." Michelle smiled, feeling more determined than ever. Her story had begun as a silent and solitary battle, but now it was a movement, and she was ready to fight for the future her baby deserved. 2 weeks after the incident at SuperValue Market, the impact of Michelle's story and Steph Curry's intervention continued to spread. The viral video had not only put the focus on her situation, but also triggered a national debate on the rights of pregnant workers and the working conditions of employees in general. The entire country seemed to be talking about the case and, more importantly, demanding changes. On social media, hashtags like "Ours Dignity at Work," "Our Working Mothers," and "Thank You Curry" were still among the most commented topics. Women from all parts of the United States were sharing their stories of workplace discrimination during pregnancy, some even more severe than Michelle's. The most impactful hashtag, however, was the one that emerged spontaneously. Michelle deserves more. Michelle's name had become a symbol of resilience and struggle for justice. The SuperValue chain, clearly pressured by public repercussions and fearing boycotts, began to implement immediate changes. In an official statement, the CEO of the company apologized to Michelle and announced a complete revision of their labor policies. Among the new regulations were accommodations for pregnant employees, which would become mandatory, ensuring that all stores offered tasks adjusted to the physical condition of pregnant employees. In addition, mandatory training for managers would be conducted, aiming to teach them how to handle sensitive situations such as pregnancy or specific medical needs with empathy and respect. A safe reporting policy was also created, allowing employees to report mistreatment or inadequate working conditions directly to corporate HR without fear of retaliation. Frank Dawson, the manager who had treated Michelle abusively, was officially dismissed after the conclusion of the internal investigation. The company stated that his conduct did not reflect the values of the chain and that he had neglected corporate guidelines. Michelle received a call from the regional manager of the chain, who personally apologized and assured her that she would be transferred to a position with less physical effort, with the option to work part-time after the baby's birth. Additionally, SuperValue announced that it would cover all medical costs related to Michelle's pregnancy, and that she would receive extended paid maternity leave, something that was not common in the company's policy until then. Meanwhile, Steph Curry and his team were finalizing the details of the Curry Family Fund for Working Mothers. The fund was officially announced at a press conference, which was attended by Michelle. Seated beside Curry, she seemed nervous but determined. "When this happened, I thought nobody cared," said Michelle, her voice emotional but firm. "But now I see that I'm not alone. What Steph did for me wasn't just helping with what I needed at that moment. He opened a door for so many other women to be heard and supported." Curry, next to her, smiled and took the microphone. "My mother worked hard to raise me. My wife, Isha, is an incredible force, and I've seen up close the challenges she faced during pregnancies. I believe that supporting working mothers is not only the right thing to do, it's something that benefits the entire society. This fund is just the beginning." The goal of the fund was clear: to offer financial, legal, and emotional support for working women in vulnerable situations. From help with medical costs to legal representation in cases of discrimination, the fund promised to be a safety net for those who had no other option. The repercussions of the case also began to impact other major companies. Supermarket chains, restaurants, and even corporate offices began to review their internal policies, fearing they would be the next targets of public complaints. Some companies, as preventive measures, announced new initiatives to support pregnant employees, including flexible hours, paid maternity leave, and training programs for managers. The United States Department of Labor, in turn, announced that it was reviewing federal regulations on accommodations for pregnant women in the workplace. The discussion about Michelle's case had reached Congress, where legislators began to debate a bill that would ensure greater protection for pregnant women in all sectors. For Michelle, the impact of all this was difficult to process. She went from an invisible employee, silently struggling to survive, to a symbol of change. Although the changes in her life were welcome, she was still adjusting to the sudden attention. However, with the support of Curry and his team, Michelle began to realize that her story had power. She was invited to speak at events organized by the Curry Fund and other labor organizations. Her voice, previously muffled by fear and exhaustion, was now heard by audiences that applauded her courage. "I never imagined something like this would happen," said Michelle during an interview on a TV show. "I just wanted a job that would allow me to take care of myself and my baby. But if my experience can help other women fight for their rights, then all this was worth it." The interviews and public appearances not only helped amplify her message, but also gave Michelle a new perspective on her future. She began to consider the possibility of studying or working on something related to defending labor rights, to continue helping other people. In the store where it all began, the changes were already noticeable. Carlos, the assistant manager who had shown empathy from the beginning, was promoted to manager. He implemented new practices to ensure that situations like Michelle's would never happen again. "This is not just a job," he said in a meeting with employees. "It's a place where everyone should feel respected. Michelle showed us what happens when we ignore this, and we will never make the same mistake again." The Ritu, employees, previously silent and fearful, began to feel more confident in expressing their concerns. A new culture of support and respect was emerging, and the store was becoming an example for other units of the chain. What began as an individual struggle was transforming into a national movement. Michelle, with Curry's help, had lit a spark that was leading companies, legislators, and society to rethink how they treated their female workers. "This is not just about me," said Michelle at another event organized by the fund. "It's about all women who work hard every day, even when they face immense challenges. It's about ensuring they are treated with the dignity they deserve." And as Michelle prepared for the arrival of her baby, she knew she was helping build a better future. Not just for her and her child, but for all working mothers who would come after her. 2 months later, on a quiet and sunny morning, Michelle held her newborn daughter in her arms. The hospital was silent, and she could hear the baby's soft sighs as she slept, wrapped in a small white blanket with pink details. It was a moment of peace that she had dreamed of for months, but which, for a long time, seemed unattainable. Now, everything seemed different. For the first time in a long time, Michelle felt that the future was full of possibilities. The delivery had been smooth, and thanks to the health insurance covered by the company after Curry's intervention, she didn't have to worry about medical expenses. Little Emma was born healthy, weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces. And from the first moment, Michelle felt an indescribable connection with her daughter. Sitting on the hospital bed, she looked at Emma with teary eyes, feeling grateful for the entire journey that brought her to that moment. Shortly after lunch, the door of the room opened, and Michelle heard a familiar voice. "Look who's here to meet the newest fighter on the team." Steph Curry entered the room with a warm smile, carrying a huge bouquet of flowers and a bag full of presents for the baby. Beside him, Isha Curry held a small basket with items for newborns, diapers, tiny clothes, and even a personalized blanket with the name Emma embroidered on it. "You didn't have to do this," said Michelle, moved as the two approached. "Just the fact that you're here already means so much to me." "Of course we had to," replied Curry, placing the bouquet beside the bed. "Emma is officially part of our big family now. And believe me, she already has a big team rooting for her." Isha approached the baby, admiring her with bright eyes. "She's perfect, Michelle," she said softly. "And you're an amazing woman. Everything you went through to get here. You're an inspiration." Michelle smiled, holding back tears. "I couldn't have done it without you. Your support changed my life." As they talked, Curry updated Michelle on the advances of the fund they created together. The Curry Family Fund for Working Mothers. Since the official launch, dozens of women in similar situations had already received assistance, from legal help to financial support for medical expenses. Michelle's story had become the starting point for something much bigger, and the impact of the fund was growing every day. "Did you know your name is all over the country now, right?" joked Curry. "Michelle Thompson, the woman who started a movement." Michelle laughed, shaking her head. "I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to be able to work in peace and take care of my baby. And that's exactly why your story touched so many people," said Curry. "Because you represent millions of women who just want the basics: respect, dignity, and a fair workplace." Later, after Curry and Isha said goodbye, Michelle was alone with Emma again. As she cradled the baby, she thought about how her life had changed dramatically in such a short time. What once seemed like an endless cycle of exhausting work and fear now seemed like a new opportunity to start over. 2 weeks later, Michelle returned to Super Value Market, not to work, but for a special ceremony organized by the store. Since the incident, the unit had completely transformed. Carlos, now the official manager of the store, welcomed her at the entrance with a huge smile and a sign that said, "Welcome back, Michelle. We thought it would be important to celebrate what you did for all of us," said Carlos as he led her inside. The employee cafeteria, which was previously a cold and impersonal space, was now decorated with balloons and signs made by Michelle's colleagues. Everyone was there: Sophia, Jamal, Elena, and even new employees who had heard about her story. There was a cake with the message, "Thank you, Michelle," and a small table with gifts for Emma. "You inspired us to fight for changes," said Carlos during a short speech. "Because of you, our store and many others are becoming better places to work. And because of you, we learned that we should never stay silent in the face of injustice." Michelle was moved as she heard the applause from her colleagues. Jamal gave her a present, a photo album with images of all the store employees and handwritten thank you messages. "You showed us that, even when it seems impossible, it's possible to make a difference," said Sophia, holding Michelle's hands. "And now, whenever someone here feels disrespected, they'll remember what you did." In the following months, Michelle dedicated herself not only to taking care of Emma, but also to helping other women in similar situations. She began working with the Curry Fund, occasionally traveling to speak at events and share her story. Her voice, previously muffled by fear and exhaustion, was now a powerful tool to inspire and mobilize change. Michelle also began studying labor law in a night course offered by an organization partnered with the fund. She wanted to better understand workers' rights and, one day, be able to help other people fight for fair conditions. Her journey of struggle and overcoming had awakened a new passion in her, and she was determined to use her experience to create a lasting impact. 1 year later, Michelle participated in a large event organized by the Curry Fund. During the event, she went on stage with Emma in her arms, now a smiling baby full of energy. The audience gave her a standing ovation as she thanked everyone who had helped her on her journey. "A year ago, I was just a woman trying to survive, not knowing if I could take care of myself and my baby," said Michelle, with a voice full of emotion. "But today, thanks to the support I received and the power of community, I'm here, ready to give back and fight for other women like me. Together, we can create a future where all working mothers are treated with the respect they deserve." When the event ended, Curry approached Michelle with a satisfied smile. "You did it, Michelle. You transformed your story into something that will impact generations." Michelle looked at Emma, who was now playing in Isha's arms, and then at Curry. "I didn't do it alone, and for that, I will be eternally grateful." As Michelle left the event, carrying Emma in her arms, she felt a sense of achievement that she had never experienced before. Her struggle had begun as a silent and solitary battle, but now it was part of a larger movement, a movement that promised to change lives. And, above all, she knew she had secured a better future for her daughter, a future full of hope, dignity, and opportunities.